The royal archives sit beneath Windsor Castle like a secret. Miles of corridors lined with documents that span centuries. Letters from queens, journals of kings, records of births, deaths, marriages, and scandals carefully preserved behind climate-controlled doors. Very few people have access to this place. Even fewer know what's truly kept there. On a Tuesday morning in October, Emma Richardson walked down the stone steps leading to the archive's entrance, her heels clicking with confident purpose. She'd made this journey twice before, always with the same credentials, always granted immediate entry. Personal assistant to the Queen Consort. That title opened doors throughout the palace system. But today, something was different. Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood at the entrance, his red ceremonial uniform crisp, despite the early hour. He'd been assigned to this post only 48 hours earlier, a sudden reassignment that came with explicit instructions. Instructions that were about to be tested. Emma approached with her usual brisk efficiency, already reaching for her credentials. "Good morning," she said, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm here to access the correspondence files. Section 12 through 14. Marcus didn't move from his position, blocking the door. "Good morning, Ms. Richardson. I'm afraid I can't grant you access today." Emma's smile froze. "I'm sorry, what?" "Access to the Royal Archives has been restricted. Your credentials are no longer valid for entry." The color drained from Emma's face, then rushed back as anger bloomed. "That's impossible. I have standing authorization from the Queen Consort herself. I've been researching these files for her upcoming biography project for 3 months." Marcus had been briefed on this exact conversation. He knew what she would say, knew the authority she would invoke. He also knew his orders came from someone with greater authority still. "I understand, ma'am. However, as of yesterday evening, those authorizations have been revoked. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're enjoying the story of power, secrets, and royal tension, please hit that subscribe button. We bring you the most compelling insider stories from the royal world that you won't find anywhere else." Emma stepped closer, her voice dropping to something sharper. "Lieutenant, I don't think you understand the situation. The Queen Consort is expecting these documents this afternoon. If I return empty-handed because a guard decided to overstep his authority, the decision wasn't mine, Ms. Richardson." Marcus met her eyes steadily. The king's. The silence that followed was absolute. Emma stared at him as if he'd spoken a foreign language. Around them, the usual sounds of the castle continued. Distant footsteps, muffled voices, the hum of heating systems working to keep the ancient stones warm. But in this corridor, in this moment, everything had stopped. "That's not possible," Emma finally said, but her voice had lost its certainty. His Majesty wouldn't interfere with the Queen Consort's research without discussing it with her first. "I don't have information about discussions, ma'am. I only have my orders. No access to the Royal Archives for you or anyone representing the Queen Consort's office. Effective immediately." Emma's mind was racing, calculating. She'd been carefully building this archive of information for months. Letters, documents, private correspondence that would form the foundation of Camilla's official biography. Information that would shape how history remembered her. How the public understood her journey from controversial figure to Queen Consort. And now, suddenly, inexplicably, that access was gone. "I need to see the written order," Emma demanded. Marcus pulled a sealed envelope from his jacket. The royal seal was unmistakable. Emma took it with shaking hands, broke the seal, and read. Her face went through a series of expressions. Disbelief, confusion, then something darker. Fear, perhaps, or fury held barely in check. "This can't stand," she said quietly. "This is a direct insult to the Queen Consort. She has every right to access historical documents, especially those pertaining to the royal family's public role. The order is very specific, ma'am. Certain sections of the archives are now classified under direct royal prerogative. Section 12 through 14 are among them." "What's in those sections that suddenly requires this level of security?" Marcus didn't answer because he didn't know. He'd asked the same question when receiving his orders. The response had been clear. His job wasn't to understand, only to enforce. Emma folded the letter carefully, her movements precise, controlled. I need to make a phone call. Of course, ma'am. She walked several paces away, pulled out her phone, and dialed. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see her body language. The initial deference when someone answered, the growing frustration as she explained the situation, the shock when she received whatever response came through the phone. When she returned, her entire demeanor had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by something more uncertain. Long has this order been in place? She asked quietly. Since yesterday evening, ma'am. Signed and sealed by His Majesty personally. Emma looked at the closed door behind Marcus, at the entrance to the archives that had been opened to her just days ago. Whatever she'd been searching for in those documents, whatever information she'd been carefully compiling, was now beyond her reach. This isn't over, she said. But the words lacked conviction. Marcus watched her walk back up the stone steps, heels clicking more slowly now, shoulders slightly hunched. He'd been a guard for 12 years. He'd learned to read people, to sense when something was more than it appeared. And this morning, standing in front of those archive doors, he knew he wasn't just blocking access to old papers and letters. He was standing at the center of something bigger, something that involved power, family, and secrets that someone very powerful wanted to keep hidden. What Marcus didn't know was that his decision to follow orders, to stand firm despite pressure and implied threats, had just set in motion a series of events that would expose truths some people would do anything to keep buried. Asterisk. Emma Richardson didn't go to her office. She went directly to Clarence's house, her mind churning through possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. She'd been researching those archives for 3 months, carefully cataloging correspondence, building a narrative that would present Camilla's story in the most favorable light possible. But in the past 2 weeks, she'd found something that didn't fit the narrative. Letters that suggested a different timeline, decisions made that contradicted the official version of events. She'd flagged them for further investigation, intending to return this week for deeper research. And now, suddenly, the archives were closed to her. Camilla was in her private sitting room when Emma arrived. Still wearing her dressing gown, tea growing cold on the table beside her. She looked up as Emma entered, and immediately knew something was wrong. They've blocked access, Emma said, without preamble. The king has personally revoked my credentials for the royal archives. Camilla set down the book she'd been reading. Charles did what? Signed an order yesterday evening. Sections 12 through 14 are now classified. The guard wouldn't let me pass the door. Silence stretched between them. Camilla's expression was carefully neutral. But Emma had worked for her long enough to recognize the calculations happening behind those eyes. Did the order specify a reason? Camilla asked finally. No, just that access was revoked by royal prerogative. But ma'am, the timing, I know. Camilla stood, walked to the window overlooking the gardens. You found something? Last week you mentioned there were discrepancies in the correspondence from 1995. Emma nodded, even though Camilla wasn't looking at her. The letters don't match the timeline we've been given. The official story is that certain decisions were made in response to public pressure. But the correspondence suggests they were planned months earlier, before the public even knew what was happening, and now those letters are locked away. Camilla turned back to face Emma. This is my husband we're talking about. Why would Charles suddenly restrict access to historical documents? Documents that are part of his family's own history. Maybe because they're also part of your history, ma'am? And someone doesn't want that history examined too closely. Camilla's face hardened. Someone. You mean William? Emma didn't confirm or deny, but they both knew. Since Charles had become king, the power dynamics had shifted. William, as heir to the throne, now held influence that went beyond his official role. He had the king's ear in ways that Camilla, despite being queen consort, sometimes did not. I need those documents, Camilla said quietly. The biography isn't just vanity, Emma. It's about controlling the narrative. About ensuring that history remembers the full picture, not just the version that's convenient for everyone else. I understand, ma'am. But the order is sealed with the king's authority. Going against it would be Would be what? Disrespectful to my husband? Overstepping my role? Camilla's voice was sharp now. I spent decades being told where I could and couldn't go, what I could and couldn't do. I was promised that when Charles became king, things would be different, that I would have a voice, a role, recognition. And you do, ma'am, do I? Or am I just decoration? A title with no real power? She paused, collecting herself. I'm sorry. This isn't your fault, Emma. You've done everything right. Emma hesitated, then spoke carefully. There might be another way. The archives aren't the only source of information. Some of those letters were copies. The originals might still be in private collections. Family members, close friends, people who were involved at the time. You're suggesting I go around the official channels? Suggesting that your story deserves to be told. And if someone is trying to prevent that, maybe it's because the story is more important than we realized. Camilla looked at Emma for a long moment. All right, start making discreet inquiries. But Emma, be careful. If William is behind this, and he discovers what we're doing, she didn't need to. They both understood that the modern royal family, for all its carefully maintained image of unity, was still a family, and families could be ruthless when protecting their interests. Meanwhile, back at Windsor Castle, Marcus was filing his report of the morning's incident. It was routine paperwork, nothing unusual. But as he typed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just played a small part in something much larger. His commander appeared in the doorway. Webb. A word. Marcus followed him into a private office. The door closed with a heavy click. The incident this morning with Ms. Richardson, the commander began. It's drawing attention. Followed orders, sir. The king's sealed order was clear. I know you did, and you did it correctly. But there are people asking questions. Why now? Why those specific sections? Why such a sudden restriction? Marcus waited, knowing his commander wasn't really asking him. You're to remain at that post for the foreseeable future. No one enters those archives without express written permission from His Majesty. Not palace staff, not researchers, not historians. No one understood, sir. And Webb. If anyone pressures you, intimidates you, or tries to offer you incentives to step aside. He paused significantly. Report it immediately. This goes higher than you know. After Marcus left the office, he stood in the corridor for a moment, processing. He'd been a guard for 12 years, had protected royals, secured important events, maintained order. But he'd never felt like he was guarding anything truly dangerous before. Until now. Because whatever was in those archive sections, whatever Emma Richardson had been researching, it was important enough for the king to personally seal it away. Important enough for warnings about pressure and intimidation. Important enough that his commander looked genuinely concerned. Marcus returned to his post at the archive entrance. The stone corridor was empty, quiet. But he knew this silence wouldn't last. People who wanted access to information rarely gave up after one refusal. And somewhere in London, Emma Richardson was making phone calls, pulling threads, looking for ways around the walls that had been built to keep her out. She didn't know it yet, but her search was about to uncover something far more significant than historical discrepancies. She was about to discover why some secrets are worth protecting, no matter the cost. 3 days after the archives were sealed, Marcus noticed something odd. A maintenance worker he'd never seen before appeared outside the archive entrance, carrying tools and wearing the standard palace contractor badge. Electrical inspection, the man said, showing his credentials. Scheduled maintenance for the climate control system. Marcus checked the schedule on his tablet. No maintenance was listed. I'll need to verify this with facilities management, Marcus said. The man's friendly expression tightened slightly. It's an emergency call. Temperature fluctuations detected in Sector 12. Could damage the documents if not addressed immediately. Sector 12. The exact section that had been sealed. Wait here, Marcus instructed. He made the call. Facilities management had no record of any emergency call. No temperature fluctuations detected. No maintenance worker dispatched. When Marcus returned, the man was gone. Marcus immediately reported the incident. Within an hour, palace security was reviewing camera footage, checking contractor databases, tracing how someone had obtained a convincing fake badge and detailed out knowledge of the archive layout. The investigation led nowhere. The man had disappeared into London's crowds like smoke. But Marcus understood the message. Someone was testing the security, probing for weaknesses, and they weren't going to stop. At Clarence House, Emma's discreet inquiries were bearing fruit, though not the kind she'd hoped for. She'd contacted 3 people who'd been close to the royal family in the 1990s. All 3 had initially agreed to meet with her. All 3 had canceled within 24 hours, offering vague excuses and nervous apologies. Someone was getting to them first. "They're scared," Emma told Camilla during a private meeting. "I can hear it in their voices. Something or someone is warning them off." Camilla stood at her window watching rain streak the glass. "When I married Charles, I thought the hard part was over. The years of being the other woman, the villain in everyone's story. I thought becoming queen consort would mean respect, recognition. Instead, I'm still fighting to be heard." "Ma'am, perhaps we should let this go. If the king himself has sealed these records, the king is my husband, Emma, and someone is using his authority without his full understanding of what they're doing. You think he doesn't know why William wanted those sections sealed?" Camilla turned to face her assistant. "I think Charles knows there are uncomfortable truths in those archives. I think William has convinced him that keeping them sealed protects the monarchy. But what if it doesn't? What if the real danger is letting secrets fester until they explode?" Emma had worked in royal service long enough to know that the most dangerous people were often those who believed they were protecting something important. Good intentions could justify terrible actions. "There's one more option," Emma said quietly. "Someone who is there, who knows the truth, who might still be willing to talk." "Who?" "Lady Patricia Ashford. She was Princess Diana's private secretary during the crucial years. She kept copies of everything, supposedly. After Diana's death, she disappeared from public life. Lives in Scotland now." Camilla considered this. "Patricia hated me, blamed me for Diana's unhappiness, which is exactly why her testimony would be credible. If she tells your side of the story, if she admits there were complexities that the public never understood, it would carry weight. And if she refuses, if she tells William we've approached her," Emma met her gaze steadily, "then we're no worse off than we are now. Ma'am, someone is actively working against you. They're sealing archives, intimidating witnesses, using the king's authority to rewrite history. If you don't fight back, you're letting them control your legacy." That evening, Emma boarded a train to Edinburgh. She hadn't told Camilla she was going. If this backfired, she wanted the queen consort to have plausible deniability. The Scottish countryside rolled past her window, gray and misty. Emma had Patricia's address obtained through old contacts who still owed her favors. No appointment, no warning. Sometimes the direct approach was the only approach. Back at Windsor Castle, Marcus was receiving his 3rd briefing of the day. The attempted breach had everyone on edge. "We're installing additional security measures," his commander explained. "Biometric scanners, upgraded surveillance, armed response protocols. Whatever's in those archives, someone wants it badly enough to try infiltration. Sir, has anyone explained what we're actually protecting? Knowing the stakes might help us anticipate future attempts." The commander looked at him for a long moment. "Webb, the less you know, the safer you are. But I'll tell you this. Those archives contain correspondence from a very difficult period in royal history. Letters that, in the wrong hands, could reignite old wounds and create new crises." "The Diana years," Marcus said. "It wasn't a question." "I didn't say that, but yes. And not just about Princess Diana. About decisions made before and after her death. About who knew what, when they knew it, and what they chose to do with that knowledge." Marcus understood now. This wasn't about protecting old scandals. This was about protecting living people from truths that could destroy reputations, relationships, and carefully maintained public images. "The queen consort wants access to these documents for her biography," the commander continued. "She believes she has a right to tell her story. including the parts that make others uncomfortable. The Prince of Wales believes those stories should remain private, that reopening old wounds serves no purpose except to cause pain. And the king? The king is caught between his wife and his son. Between past and future, he sealed those archives to buy time, to prevent an immediate crisis. But that's just delaying the inevitable. Marcus returned to his post feeling the weight of what he was guarding. Not just paper and ink. Lives. Legacies. The fragile piece of a family that lived under constant scrutiny. 300 miles north, Emma Richardson knocked on the door of a stone cottage overlooking a gray Scottish loch. The woman who answered was older than her photographs, gray-haired and worn, but her eyes were still sharp. "Lady Patricia," Emma began. "I know who you are," Patricia interrupted. "And I know who sent you. You can tell the Queen Consort that I have nothing to say to her. Not now. Not ever. Please, just 5 minutes. I'm not here to defend anyone or attack anyone. I'm here because there are documents being sealed away. Truths being hidden, and I think you of all people would understand why that's dangerous." Patricia's expression flickered. "What documents?" "The royal correspondence from 1995 through 1997, letters between Prince Charles and various advisors, records of decisions made during Diana's final years." Patricia's face went pale. Those should have been destroyed, but they weren't. And now someone is making sure no one can access them. Don't you find that suspicious? Patricia stood in her doorway, the wind from the loch whipping her gray hair. Behind her, Emma could see a cozy sitting room with photographs on the mantel. Photographs of Diana, young, smiling, alive. "Come in," Patricia said finally. "But I'm not promising anything." As Emma stepped into that cottage, she had no idea that her visit was already being reported. That someone in the village had recognized her, made a phone call, set in motion a response that would change everything. The battle for the truth was about to reach a breaking point. Inside Patricia's cottage, tea grew cold as the two women talked. Not about conspiracies or scandals, but about something more fundamental. About how history gets written by those with power, and how those without power become footnotes or villains. "Diana kept copies of everything," Patricia said finally. She knew that someday people would try to rewrite what happened. She wanted evidence. Truth. So yes, I have letters. Correspondence that she asked me to keep safe. Letters that contradict the official narrative. Patricia smiled sadly. Letters that complicate it. That's different. Diana wasn't perfect. Neither was Charles. Neither is Camilla. But the story that's been told, the one where there are clear heroes and villains, it's too simple. Life is never that simple. The Queen Consort just wants to tell her side. William wants to protect his mother's memory. Can you blame him? He was a child when the world tore his family apart. He watched his mother become a saint in death after being hunted in life. He's not going to let anyone tarnish that memory, even with nuance. Emma leaned forward. But if the truth is more complicated, doesn't he owe it to everyone, including his mother's memory, to acknowledge that? Pretending there were no gray areas doesn't honor Diana. It turns her into a symbol instead of a person. Patricia stood, walked to a locked cabinet, and returned with a wooden box. Inside were letters, carefully preserved in protective sleeves. "I'm not giving you these," she said, "but I'll tell you what's in them, and then you can decide what to do with that information." For the next hour, Patricia spoke. About letters from Charles expressing genuine anguish over his failing marriage. About correspondence from royal advisors debating how to manage public perception. About Diana's own words, showing a woman who was struggling, complicated, sometimes manipulative in her desperation to be heard, and about Camilla. Letters that showed her not as a seductress destroying a fairy tale, but as a woman caught in an impossible situation, loving a man who'd been forced into a marriage that satisfied duty but not heart. "The real scandal," Patricia said, "isn't that Charles loved Camilla. It's that he was never allowed to marry her in the first place. That archaic rules about religion and succession forced him to choose someone suitable instead of someone he loved. Diana paid the price for that. Camilla paid the price. Charles paid the price. Everyone lost. Emma was taking notes, her hand cramping from writing so fast. This was it? The nuance, the complexity. The truth that made everyone uncomfortable because it meant no one was purely right or purely wrong. Why are you telling me this? Emma asked. You said you hated Camilla. I did. I blamed her for Diana's pain. But I'm old now, and I'm tired of carrying hate. Maybe it's time for a more honest story. Maybe that's what we all need to move forward. Emma left the cottage with pages of notes and a recording Patricia had agreed to make with conditions. The truth would come out, but carefully, respectfully, in a way that honored everyone's humanity. She boarded the overnight train back to London, exhausted but energized. She didn't notice the man in the seat 3 rows back, the one who'd been following her since Edinburgh. Didn't notice him making a phone call, speaking quietly, reporting her every move. At Windsor Castle, Marcus's night shift was usually quiet. But tonight, at 2 in the morning, his radio crackled. Webb, you have visitors incoming. Palace security escort. Asterisk Marcus straightened, alert. 2 in the morning wasn't a usual time for official business. 2 security officers appeared, flanking a figure in civilian clothes. As they drew closer, Marcus recognized him. Prince William, Your Royal Highness, Marcus said. Standing at attention, Lieutenant Webb. I apologize for the late hour. William's voice was calm, controlled, but his presence at this hour said everything about how serious this was. I need to inspect the archives personally. Marcus hesitated for only a second. Sir, my orders require written authorization from His Majesty the King. I'm aware. And normally, I would go through proper channels, but circumstances have changed. Someone is attempting to access restricted information through alternative means. I need to verify the security of the physical documents. Sir, with respect, I still need written authorization. The security officers tensed. William raised a hand, stopping them. Lieutenant, I appreciate your dedication to protocol, but I'm not asking to remove anything or read anything. I'm asking to verify that the archives haven't been compromised. Surely that falls within security concerns. Marcus understood the position he was in. Refuse the future king or violate his explicit orders. He chose the only option his conscience would allow. Sir, I can allow you to inspect the physical security, the locks and seals, but I cannot permit access to the documents themselves without the king's authorization. I can contact His Majesty now if you wish. William studied him for a long moment. You're very good at your job, Lieutenant. That's either going to serve you well or cost you everything. I hope it's the former, sir. William pulled out his phone, made a call. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw William's expression shift from determination to frustration to resignation. When the call ended, William looked at Marcus with something that might have been respect. My father says the document stays sealed, and you're to remain at your post. He also says... William paused, as if the words were difficult. He says that if I want access, I need to discuss it with him in person. Not at 2 in the morning via phone call. Yes, sir. After William left, Marcus's commander appeared. You just refused the Prince of Wales. I followed my orders, sir. Do you know what's happening here, Webb? Really happening? Marcus thought about Emma Richardson's trip to Scotland, about fake maintenance workers, about a family trying to control a narrative that kept slipping through their fingers. I think there's a war being fought over truth, sir, and I'm standing in the middle of it. That's exactly right. And the problem with standing in the middle is that both sides see you as either an obstacle or a target. The commander handed him an envelope. This came through tonight. Transfer orders. Effective immediately. Marcus's stomach dropped. Sir, I've done nothing wrong. I know, but someone with influence wants you removed from this post. They're offering you a promotion. Better pay? Better hours? Assignment to a high-profile event rotation. A bribe. Or a reward for good service. It's all in how you look at it. Marcus opened the envelope, read the orders. It was true. A promotion, better position, everything he'd worked toward. All he had to do was accept it and step aside. And if I refuse, then you stay here. But Webb, they'll find another way, another angle. You can't stand against this kind of pressure forever. Marcus looked at the sealed archive door behind him. Thought about the truths locked inside, about the people fighting to control them, about what it meant to be the kind of person who could be bought, or the kind who couldn't. What Marcus didn't know was that at that exact moment, Emma Richardson was being pulled from the London train by police. Not arrested, but detained for questioning about unauthorized contact with a witness in an ongoing investigation. An investigation that didn't actually exist. The pressure was mounting, and everyone was about to discover just how far people would go to protect their version of the truth. Emma sat in a gray interrogation room for 3 hours before anyone explained why she'd been pulled from the train. When the detective finally arrived, he looked uncomfortable. Like a man carrying out orders he didn't fully understand. Ms. Richardson, we received a report that you've been contacting witnesses in relation to sensitive historical matters. Matters that touch on national security. Emma almost laughed. National security? I'm researching a biography. I interviewed someone about events from 30 years ago. Someone who possesses documents that are considered protected under the Official Secrets Act. Lady Patricia Ashford isn't subject to the Official Secrets Act. She's a private citizen who kept personal correspondence. Detective shifted in his seat. Nevertheless, we need to ask you about the nature of your conversations. What documents you may have received, and who instructed you to make contact. An employee of the royal household. I don't answer to local police. You do when national security is invoked. They went in circles for another hour. Emma gave them nothing. No details about her conversation with Patricia. No information about what she'd learned. No admission that she was acting on anyone's orders. Finally, they released her with a warning. A warning that felt more like a threat. By the time Emma reached London, it was dawn. She went straight to Clarence's house, where Camilla was already awake, pacing her sitting room. They detained you, Camilla said as Emma entered. It wasn't a question. For 3 hours, someone called in a national security concern. It's absurd, but it was effective. They wanted to scare me, and it worked. Did you tell them anything? Nothing. But ma'am, they know I went to Scotland. They know I spoke with Patricia. Someone is tracking my movements, reporting back. We need to assume everything we do is being monitored. Camilla sank into a chair, suddenly looking older than her years. This has gone too far. I wanted to tell my story, to have my truth acknowledged. I didn't want a war. With respect, ma'am, you didn't start this war. Someone else decided that your truth was dangerous enough to suppress. They sealed archives. They're intimidating witnesses. They're using police resources to harass people doing legitimate research. That's not about protecting the monarchy. That's about protecting specific people from accountability. You mean William? I mean whoever convinced the king to seal those archives in the first place? And I mean whoever is coordinating all these efforts to stop us? There was a knock at the door. Camilla's private secretary entered, looking grave. Ma'am, the king has requested your presence at Buckingham Palace, immediately. Camilla and Emma exchanged glances. This was it. The confrontation neither of them wanted, but both had known was coming. At Windsor Castle, Marcus was dealing with his own reckoning. The promotion offer he'd refused had been replaced with something less generous. A formal review of his conduct. Questions about whether he'd exceeded his authority. Whether his strict interpretation of orders showed poor judgment. It was professional harassment. Thinly veiled, his commander pulled him aside before the review board convened. Webb, I'm going to be direct with you. There are people who want you gone from this post. They're manufacturing reasons. This review is just the beginning. If they don't get what they want, it'll escalate. I'll let it escalate. I haven't done anything wrong. That doesn't matter. You're in the way. And in royal service, being in the way of powerful people is often a career-ending position. So what do you suggest? That I accept the bribe and leave? The commander sighed. I suggest you understand what you're up against. This isn't about right or wrong anymore. This is about power, and you don't have enough of it to win. But Marcus had something else. He had principle. And sometimes, in rare moments, that was enough. At Buckingham Palace, Camilla sat across from her husband in his private study. Charles looked tired, worn down by the impossible position of being caught between wife and son. "You sent Emma to Scotland," Charles said. "Not an accusation, just a statement." "I sent her to find the truth. There are documents being hidden, Charles. Our own history, locked away where no one can examine it. Our history is complicated, painful. I sealed those archives to protect people, to prevent old wounds from being reopened, or to prevent uncomfortable truths from being acknowledged." Camilla's voice was gentle but firm. "Charles, I've spent decades being the villain in other people's stories. I accepted that because I understood the cost of loving you. But I won't let William, or anyone else, continue to control that narrative by suppressing evidence. William is trying to protect his mother's legacy by pretending she was a saint, by erasing all the complexity, the humanity, the real story. That doesn't honor Diana. It turns her into propaganda." Charles stood, walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. "What do you want, Camilla?" "I want the truth to be available. Not sensationalized, not weaponized, but available. I want historians and biographers to have access to the full story. And yes, I want my perspective to be part of that story. And what about William? What about his feelings? What about mine?" Camilla's voice broke slightly. "I'm your wife, Charles. I'm queen consort. But I'm being treated like an outsider who needs to be managed and controlled. When does my voice matter?" The silence stretched between them. Years of history, decades of complications, a lifetime of choosing between different loyalties. "I'll discuss it with William," Charles said finally, "but I can't promise anything. He's the future of this institution. His wishes carry weight, more weight than mine." Charles didn't answer, which was answer enough. That evening, as Camilla returned to Clarence's house, she found Emma waiting with news. Tricia agreed to go on record. She'll give an interview, provide copies of the letters, share her perspective, but she wants guarantees. Protection from legal retaliation, assurance that the story will be told fairly. Can we provide that? "I don't know. We can't even access the official archives. We're working with one hand tied behind our backs." Camilla made a decision. "Then we go public. Not with accusations or attacks, but with a simple statement that there are documents being suppressed, that legitimate historical research is being blocked, that the truth is more complex than anyone has acknowledged. That will start a media firestorm." "Good, let it burn. Maybe that's what it takes to force everyone to deal with reality instead of carefully managed fiction." At Windsor Castle, Marcus stood before the review board. They asked him about his refusal to grant access to Prince William, about his strict interpretation of orders, about whether he'd shown flexibility and good judgment. He answered honestly. He'd followed orders. He'd protected the archives as instructed. He'd made no exceptions, even for powerful people. The board adjourned without a decision. But as Marcus left the hearing room, his commander caught up with him. "They're going to recommend disciplinary action. Nothing that will stick, but enough to create a black mark on your record. Enough to stall your career." Marcus nodded slowly. He'd expected this. "However," the commander continued, "there's something you should know. Your actions have been noticed by people other than those trying to punish you. People who value integrity and following proper procedures. You've made allies you didn't know you had." "What does that mean?" "It means this isn't over. For any of us." What none of them knew was that Patricia Ashford in her Scottish cottage had made a decision of her own. She'd contacted a journalist. Not a tabloid, but a serious historian who'd written extensively about the royal family. She'd offered him the letters, the truth, the complicated story that everyone was fighting to control. And tomorrow, that journalist was going to publish. The secrets everyone was trying to protect were about to become public knowledge, and the carefully maintained walls separating truth from narrative were about to come crashing down. Asterisk the article published at 6 in the morning. By 7, every news organization in Britain was running the story. By 8, the world knew. Not scandal exactly, but truth, complex, uncomfortable, human truth. Letters showing that Charles had genuinely loved Camilla for decades. Correspondence revealing that Diana had known about the relationship from the beginning, had even tried to accept it at first, before the public pressure made that impossible. Documents proving that palace advisors had mismanaged the situation at every turn, choosing public relations over people's actual well-being, and most damaging of all, evidence that recent efforts to seal archives and suppress information had come not from a desire to protect privacy, but from a coordinated campaign to control the historical narrative. Marcus heard about it. On the morning news as he prepared for his shift, he stood in his kitchen, coffee going cold in his hand, listening to journalists dissect the very documents he'd been guarding, documents that had made it into public view through an entirely different route. All his standing firm, all his refusal to be intimidated or bribed, and the information had leaked anyway. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. His phone rang. His commander. A web report to the palace immediately. Full dress uniform? You're being summoned. Marcus's stomach tightened. This was it. After everything, he was going to be made the scapegoat. Blamed for security failures, for not preventing a leak he'd had no power to stop. At Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was tense. Staff moved quickly through corridors. Phones rang constantly. Crisis management was in full swing. Marcus was escorted to a private office where he found not a disciplinary panel, but Prince William waiting alone. Lieutenant Webb, William said, and his voice was exhausted. Sit down. Marcus sat, rigid, prepared for whatever was coming. I owe you an apology, William began, and Marcus's surprise must have shown on his face. I tried to pressure you to abandon your post. I questioned your judgment. I saw you as an obstacle to what I thought was necessary. I was wrong, sir. I was just following orders. No, you were doing more than that. You were maintaining integrity in a system where integrity is increasingly rare. You stood firm against everyone, including me. And now I understand why that mattered. William walked to the window, looking out at the morning light on the palace gardens. I've spent my entire adult life trying to protect my mother's memory, to ensure that history remembered her as a saint, not as a complicated human being who made mistakes and suffered for them. I thought that was love. I thought that was loyalty. He turned back to face Marcus. But reading those letters this morning, seeing the real story, I realized I was doing the opposite. I was turning my mother into a symbol. And in doing that, I was dishonoring her humanity. She was more than a victim. She was more than a fairy tale princess. She was a real person, flawed and struggling and trying her best in an impossible situation. Marcus didn't know what to say. This was far beyond his role, beyond his understanding of royal protocols. I also realized something else, William continued. My father loved Camilla. He's always loved her. And my mother knew that, and it hurt her terribly. But the real villain wasn't Camilla or my father. It was a system that forced people into roles they couldn't fulfill, then punished them for being human. What happens now, sir? Now we deal with truth instead of fiction. The archives will be unsealed, properly cataloged, contextualized, made available to serious historians. Not sensationalized, but not hidden either. And Ms. Richardson. William smiled slightly. She and Emma have one, I suppose. Camilla will have her opportunity to tell her story. But so will everyone else. The full story, with all its complications. There was a knock at the door. Camilla entered, followed by Charles. The family dynamics in that room were almost overwhelming. Father and son, king and heir. Husband and wife, stepmother and stepson. All the roles overlapping, all the relationships complicated. William, Charles said gently. I'm sorry, Father. I thought I was protecting the family, but I was just protecting my own pain. Camilla approached William cautiously. I never wanted to replace your mother. I never could. But I did love your father. I do love him. And I'm sorry that my happiness came at the cost of so much pain for so many people. And William nodded slowly. I know. I think I've always known. I just wasn't ready to acknowledge it. He turned to Marcus. Lieutenant Webb, You're hereby commended for exemplary service. Your conduct during this entire situation will be noted in your record. Not as a black mark, but as an example of what proper service looks like. The king and I are both grateful.
Stood.
Thank you, sir. Your Majesty? As he was dismissed, Marcus caught Camilla's eye. She gave him a small nod. Recognition, perhaps. Acknowledgement that they'd both been fighting for something important, even if they'd been on different sides of the door. 2 weeks later, Marcus was back at his post at the archives, but everything had changed. The doors were no longer sealed. Researchers came and went with proper authorization. The secrets had been aired, examined, and were being incorporated into a more complete historical record. Emma Richardson visited one afternoon, carrying a manuscript. "Lieutenant Webb," she said, "I wanted to thank you. If you hadn't stood firm that first day, if you'd let me through with just my credentials and confidence, none of this would have happened. I was just doing my job, ma'am. You were doing more than that. You were proving that rules matter. That protocol exists for a reason. That not everything can be bypassed with authority and pressure." She handed him the manuscript. "The Queen Consort's biography. First draft. She wanted you to have a copy. She says you're the reason it's honest." Marcus took the manuscript, feeling its weight. Not just paper, but truth. Complicated, uncomfortable human truth. That evening, he read through it. The story of a woman who loved a man she couldn't have, then could have, then was hated for having. The story of a marriage that satisfied duty, but not heart. The story of choices made under impossible circumstances, and the price everyone paid for those choices. It wasn't heroic. It wasn't villainous. It was just human. His daughter called him that night. She was studying history at university. "Dad, I saw the news about the Royal Archives being opened, and about you being commended for your service. I'm proud of you. I just followed orders, love. No, you did something harder. You followed orders when following them cost you something, when it would have been easier to look the other way." After the call, Marcus sat in his living room thinking about truth and power, about secrets and why people protect them. He thought about the Range Rover in the rain months ago at Adelaide Cottage, about Sergeant Hartley standing firm against different pressure, about how sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons but with quiet refusal to compromise. The royal family would survive this. They'd survived worse. Public opinion would shift, judgments would be made and remade, and eventually this would become just another chapter in the long, complicated story of the British monarchy. But something fundamental had changed. The understanding that secrets, no matter how well protected, eventually find their way into light. That trying to control truth only gives it more power when it finally breaks free. At Clarence House, Camilla looked at the finished biography with mixed feelings. It was honest, sometimes brutally so. It acknowledged her mistakes, her role in others' pain, her own suffering. It didn't make her a villain or a victim. It made her human. "Are you ready for the response?" Emma asked. "No, but I don't think anyone's ever ready for truth. You just have to decide it's worth it." The book published 3 months later. Reviews were mixed. Some praised its honesty. Some criticized it for not being honest enough. Some said it proved Camilla was always the villain. Others said it proved she was always just a woman in love. Everyone saw what they wanted to see. But at least now, they were seeing something real. Marcus continued his duties at the archives. Different people came through those doors now. Historians, researchers, journalists, all seeking pieces of truth to fit into their own narratives. He checked credentials, verified authorizations, maintained order. It was quiet work. Important work. The kind of work that matters precisely because it's unglamorous, because it requires integrity when no one's watching. One afternoon, a young researcher approached him nervously. "Lieutenant Webb, I've heard about what happened, about how you stood firm against pressure. I just wanted to say, that matters. In a world where truth gets bent and shaped by whoever has the most power, people like you matter." Marcus smiled. "I just do my job. But thank you." As the researcher walked into the archives, Marcus thought about legacy. Not the kind written in official histories or commemorated with statues, but the kind built in small moments of integrity. Doing the right thing when it's hard, standing firm when standing firm costs something. The royal guard who refused to let Camilla's assistant enter the archives had become a footnote in a much larger story. But sometimes, footnotes are where the real truth lives. In the small spaces between grand narratives, the quiet choices that no one notices until years later, when historians look back and ask, how did things change? They changed because someone stood at a door and said no. Because someone else kept searching for truth despite intimidation. Because a family finally decided that honesty, no matter how uncomfortable, was worth more than carefully maintained fiction. The archives remained open. The truth remained complicated. And Marcus remained at his post, guarding not secrets anymore. But the principle that some things, once brought into light, should stay there, where everyone can see them, judge them, learn from them, and maybe finally move beyond them. Asterisk.